Hi, rock and roll photographer Bob Gruen here from New York for Boomerocity.com. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about Alice Cooper, who I think is one of the greatest showmen in rock and roll. I remember when I first saw Alice, he was doing some very simple tricks because they had no budget at the beginning, but they were very, very effective. The first time I saw Alice was at the Phil Maurice Theater, and during the show at one point he took a pillow, cut it with a knife, and then hit it with a compressed air jet, and the entire room filled up with tiny feathers. Then he took a spotlight that was taped on the end of the wire, and he started spinning the spotlight around his head so that the light would flash in your eyes and then spin all around the room and flash in your eyes. And as it spun around the room, you saw all these little dots of the feathers. And it was just really disorienting to see, be blinded by the light, and then suddenly the whole room was just little dots of white, and then you're blinded, and then dots of white. It was really effective and just so startling. I'd never seen anything like that in a rock and roll show. And a lot of Alice's songs are dark and kind of themed. At one point, he stabs a doll, and he sings a lot of very serious, kind of dark themed songs. But at the end of his show, he gets killed for it. He's actually punished with a death sentence. First time I saw him, he got in an electric chair and he was electrocuted. Of course, after that, he comes back for a big finale and an encore and cheering. But the death scene escalated from an electric chair. Then the next time I saw him, he was hanging himself for a couple of years. And then they actually had a guillotine on stage where they would chop his head off and they would hold up the head. And it was a bizarre, macabre show, but one with a moral and one that was really entertaining. It was kind of a very dark circus with rock and roll music. And Alice would act out every single song. And the show was so surreal that the greatest surrealist of them all, Salvador Dalí, decided to use Alice Cooper when he produced the world's first hologram. It was the first moving hologram. They already invented holograms, but this was a hologram where the people in the hologram actually moved, and Alice moved his mouth and looked like he was singing. And I remember going to the photo session, and Dalí was there, and he's dressed in a white robe with gold embroidery, and he's carrying on about "I am the Dalí," and he was quite interesting. And he got $25 million worth of diamonds from Harry Winston, and a little guy with a bowler hat showed up in an attaché case, and a beautiful girl, and a thug with a machine gun came into the loft, and the thug with the machine gun stood by the elevator, so nobody went out without the diamonds until the little man with the bowler hat had retrieved them. So the little man takes the diamonds out of the attaché case and he put them on a velvet pillow, and he hands the pillow to the beautiful girl. The beautiful girl goes across the room and presents the diamonds to Dalí, and the Dalí took the diamonds and placed them on Alice's head and around his neck, because he wanted them to really sparkle and be very bright in the hologram. And Alice looked great. He was doing whatever Dalí asked him to do. Dalí gave him a microphone where the stand was disjointed, like backbones put together, and Dalí held up what he called the brain of the pop star, which was something resembling a brain with a chocolate eclair in the middle and little ants running to the chocolate eclair, and that's what Dalí called the brain of the pop star. And Alice was just thoroughly amused to be working with Dalí, and it was a great afternoon. And I remember at one point there was like me and maybe there's no other photographer, but there was one or two people from the press, and so Dalí started talking to them and talking to me, and started explaining that his art was about confusionism, that nothing is ever really understood, and people live in a constant state of confusion. And when he saw that I was understanding what he said, he started screaming in all kinds of different languages, or maybe just making up words, which very thoroughly confused me. But Alice was quite the showman, and I remember Shep Gordon, his manager, was really creative, and Shep had an idea of what he called celebrity by association, to take pictures of his acts with famous celebrities. And I remember one time George Burns played at Lincoln Center. It was quite a big night to see George Burns live in person. George Burns was a hero of my dad's generation, somebody who was, the most established kind of comedian in Hollywood. And after the show, at the after party, Alice came with his manager, and they presented George Burns with the Hero Award, the Alice Cooper Hero Award, and it was a snake on a plaque that they were presenting to George Burns, and Jack Benny was there celebrating with George Burns. So I actually got a picture that night of Jack Benny, Alice Cooper, and George Burns, which was the most bizarre combination I could imagine in rock and roll, because nobody knew George Burns and Jack Benny. They were established. They weren't like rock and rollers. I mean, at that point, rock and roll was still a kind of minor part of our culture and was considered, kids' music and not really legitimate. But standing with Jack Benny and George Burns was very, very legitimate. So, and I think one of the funnier sessions I did with Alice Cooper was for his Christmas card one year. They engaged Wolfman Jack to come to to my photo studio, and Wolfman Jack dressed up as like a little Lord Fauntleroy with a little shirt and a bow tie or something like that, and Alice was dressed up as Santa Claus, and Wolfman Jack was actually sitting on Alice's lap. I had brought a big elaborate chair that I own, and we put a Christmas tree there and some packages, and they took a whole bunch of pictures together, Wolfman on Alice's lap and so on, and then they started hitting each other with the packages. I grabbed my chair and took that out of the way so nobody would hurt that, and I think the tree fell over, and it turned into quite a lot of chaos. But Alice used that for his Christmas card, and then several years later, Wolfman Jack called up and he used it for his Christmas card as well. So you can see more of my pictures of Alice Cooper on my website, bobgruen.com. Check it out. But I think I'm going to put the picture of Salvador Dalí and Alice Cooper on the Boomerocity.com website today for you all to see. So take care, and we'll see you next month. Bob Gruen, thanks.